Okay, I think it's been more than 2 minutes. I was just waiting to see if Sean would come back, but we'll get started anyway on this so that we can get through the presentation. As Ivan mentioned, my name is Linda Hayes, and I have a company called L by L Real Estate. And the reason for that name is I have a name called Look Before You Leap. And that's because of all my experience with stuff that's been going on in my real estate investing, especially in Belize. But this presentation is kind of geared for new investors, people that haven't invested. So I know lots of people in the room are way beyond some of this, but hopefully you can pick some tips up through it anyway, and we'll keep going through it this way. So in terms of my background, I'm a chartered accountant, so I'm not selling real estate or anything like that, but I did start investing in real estate in 2006 in Edmonton. And I started it different than most people because I built a brand new rental house. And that was a good time to buy, obviously, because the market was really low. And by the time it was built, it obviously made a lot more rent than I had budgeted for and did really well. And I bought and sold many properties over the years. And almost all of them have been suited homes, basement suites and garden suites. And I also have a lot of short-term rentals. And mostly every property I have has 2 properties on one lot. So one long-term rental and then one Airbnb or furnished rental, either as a basement suite or garden suite. And then as my picture denotes, I'm in Belize, which Ivan mentioned. And that is because I did buy some short-term, well, some tiny homes here that I got built brand new as well. And I have those on Airbnb kind of right now, but I have long-term tenants coming in January. So talk a little bit more about that coming up too. So what I want to talk about a little bit in this presentation is, why do you want to invest in real estate? I don't know how many people aren't invested in real estate in the room. Hopefully there's a few people that aren't at all. What are the risks? What should you include in a rental budget? Which obviously if you're not doing those and you are investing, this will help you because this is absolutely a thing you have to do, in my mind, as an accountant. The slides keep just going on me and I'm not sure why that is. So hopefully that doesn't keep happening. And also, what kind of investment should you buy? So a lot of people talk about different types of things and they invest in different things. So I'll get into that. Also due diligence, what rules you have to ensure are followed, what the right area is, and what kind of resources are out there, other than meetings like this, which is obviously a resource we all know about since we're all here. So why do we invest in real estate? And maybe you don't even know why you do, it's just people told you to, but the power of leverage is really the key here. It helps magnify returns a ton. So because we have the bank financing the majority of the investment, it makes a huge difference for us. So an investor does need a 20% down payment for a rental, and that means the bank is financing 80% of your investment. So here's a simple example where I bought an investment for $400,000, could be real estate, could be something else. If I got a mortgage at 80%, that means I only paid cash of $80,000 for the real estate. Whereas if I paid cash of $400,000, that's a completely different thing. So if I made 10% income in both of those examples, I'm making $40,000. But if you take $40,000 on a cash investment of $80,000, your return is actually 50%. Whereas if you paid cash of $400,000, your return is the simple rate of 10% that you made. This is the huge difference, obviously, with real estate investing, which hopefully is the reason many of us are in it, is because of this leverage piece. So the tenants do cover the cost of the mortgage, which generates equity. And this should happen as long as you've done a budget, which we'll talk about. Lots of people like this because it's a forced savings plan as well, because you do build future cash flow and wealth. As an accountant, I like to talk about tax deferrals because when we have real estate, we can claim depreciation to reduce our income. Generally, if things go well, we're going to pay this tax back when we sell the property because CCA is a temporary deduction, but it's still good to take it because we can reduce our income now. So when I bought my first property, I didn't pay any tax on the rental income because I claimed capital cost allowance to bring the income down to zero. As the property depreciates, that kind of, you run out of that over time and you start having to pay tax. But then my first property that I bought actually in 2006, I just sold it last year. Bought that for $250,000, just sold it for about $340,000. So obviously I didn't actually lose any money on the property at all. So I did have to pay a whole bunch of tax when I sold it, but at least we can defer it for a short amount of time. And when we're talking about profit And I only talk about buy and hold real estate in this presentation. Obviously, your profit there would be your monthly cash flow, your mortgage principal pay down. And then, of course, we could have appreciation, but it's never guaranteed. And you can just as likely lose money as make it. So when I do a budget, I don't factor that in. Obviously, I've had lots of properties that have made money, and I've had lots that also went down in value depending on what I bought. So lots of learnings with that. And just a brief talk on flipping is obviously they can be very high return, but also very high risk. And I like to just talk about a tax warning on that piece too. So if you are flipping property, if you're buying it to resell, that is actually business income, not capital gain. So it's taxed at 100% versus 50% of your gain. So if you didn't know that and you're trying to do your taxes as if you do the same way for your buy and hold, that is not the right answer. It is business income. And there's been lots of court cases with CRA finding people that did their taxes wrong, and then they have to pay back a lot of money. So I know this is an introduction, but I still like to get into a lot of the tax aspects that people have problems with. So risks to consider with real estate, obviously the economy could go down and property values can change. And if that happens though, obviously if we have tenants in it and the rents stay high, then that doesn't matter to us. Some people say, well, I bought a property and it didn't cash flow. Well, obviously, if you did a budget, you should have known it was going to cash flow because you did your research. And so that shouldn't be an issue. A lot of people talk about getting bad tenants. I'm in the middle of that right now. I just had a tenant move out. I told them they can end their lease early December 31st, and they moved out December 1st and keep threatening to take me to court because they want their deposit back. So obviously I'm just kind of ignoring their emails now, sent them the damage deposit report, said, sorry, yeah, fine, take me to court. But we do have problems like that and have to get some work done on the house now. So that can happen. Ideally, you screen your tenants really well and you don't have those kind of things happen, but certainly they can happen at times. Phone calls in the middle of the night. I hear lots of people talk about this. And since I've been investing in 2006, I've only had one call at midnight. And it was because it was a brand new house. People got in really late at night, showered, and water was coming through a light. So obviously that was a huge issue. And I happened to be awake because it was a weekend and dealt with it the next day. Not having time is another thing people talk about. I mean, I have a full-time job. I have lots of properties. Obviously, if you don't have time, you can hire a property manager to help you, which obviously we have lots of those probably in the group that you can reach out to. So time isn't really an issue. Property managers help. Also, if you don't have time, but you want to invest, obviously find a joint venture partner to work with that has the time to do it and invest with them. And a lot of us obviously do that as well. So I already mentioned budgeting. Make sure any property you buy will have positive cash flow. So it's an investment, and that means it doesn't matter how good a deal the property is. So because the property could appreciate, a lot of people just want to buy it, hoping they can flip it and sell it for a profit, but it's really hard to predict. So I always exclude appreciation from my returns because we know it could did go down. And obviously we have to factor in realtor commissions as well when we sell. So it's something to factor in. Many investors do put 2% appreciation into their budgets or whatever number they want to use. So one thing to consider, if you're going to say you want to invest with a joint venture partner and they give you a budget, make sure you know what they're putting in the budget, because some people might put 2%, some people might put 10%. And if you don't believe those numbers, obviously you might not be investing in something you want to do. So make sure you check and verify everything you're looking at. So and the other thing I always say is don't ever rely on someone trying to sell you something. And now that I'm in Belize, I can say that definitively. I was on a phone call today with one of my friends from Canada. He's 20 years old. He's a gold and silver trader. He owns lots of rental properties in Regina, but he also has 2 properties in Belize. And he is kind of on the same path I am, going, my God, the realtors here are the worst ever. And hey, I thank you for introducing me to Kate. We love her because she's the only person that's like a buyer's agent who doesn't only show their own listings. And I have a realtor friend that just left, went back to Edmonton today, actually, but he said, I can't believe this market in Belize. It's almost like commercial real estate in Edmonton because there is no MLS system. So everybody is just trying to sell you stuff and you never know what the value is because, well, I mean, I guess if you ever invest in commercial, you'll know how it's like. And investing in a country like Belize, it's exactly like that. You basically have to figure stuff out on your own. So the other thing to make sure is that you put money into a reserve account to have cash in case a tenant pays late or if you have a vacancy. And generally it's good to have 3 months rent as a reserve. Now, if you have hundreds of properties, maybe you don't need to keep that much for every property, but when you're starting out, definitely make sure you have a good reserve. So what do you include in a budget? Obviously, you want to make sure you have positive cash flow. So if you have negative, it only gets worse if you have a vacancy or something unplanned happens. So when you're doing your budget, make sure you include your mortgage payment, the full amount, property tax, insurance, utilities if they're not paid by the tenant, include a percentage for vacancy, all your repairs and maintenance, which you should put into a savings account because over time you will need it, condo fees if you're buying a condo, if you're financing your down payment, include any line of credit interest, and then property management fees. So one thing I've had people say is, well, I'm going to self-manage, so I don't want to put a property management fee in my budget. And that is the wrong thing to do. First of all, if you only ever buy one property, you should at least still make money for your time. And if a property manager charges 10%, put it in for that reason. But the reason we really want to do it more often than not is because we might be able to self-manage 1, 2, maybe even 5 properties. But once we get up to 20 or 30 or 100, probably not the case. And if you didn't factor in this property management right off the get-go, you could have a whole bunch of unperforming properties in your portfolio when you expand. So that's kind of what you want to include when you do your budget. So I basically wanted to show some examples of different types of property you could consider. And these are all hypothetical. I'm not saying you should buy any of these or that you should even look at the kind of properties I buy. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just showing a way you can compare different investment alternatives. So I gave an example. If you could rent a 3-bedroom unit at $1,600 a rent. And when I was looking at my budgets here, I had a new starter home that you could buy for about $370,000. Obviously, that depends where it is, the lot, the size of the home. So I was using 3 brand new properties, and I actually had 3 properties just like this that I could have bought at one point. Not that I was going to buy them, but it was a different friend of mine that said, hey, here's some great deals. So let's say you could find a deal on a house for $350,000, and a lot of people will look and go, well, if it costs $370,000 normally and it's 20 grand off, I like this property and I want to buy it. And a lot of people make purchase decisions just that way. They go, well, I'm going to make 20 grand if I resell this. Well, once you factor in real estate commission and taxes, you really should never have done that if that's your only purpose, right? So doing your budget for cash flow is really critical. Then maybe you could buy a townhouse for $313,000. Or you could build a house with a basement suite, say for $480,000. And again, these are numbers that are real numbers in a certain area, but whatever your numbers are, you can do the same analysis with what you're using. And I put in a mortgage rate of 3.69 just because it was the one I was looking at when I did these examples, and a 30-year amortization. And rates can be lower now, but they might go up too. So it doesn't really matter either way. So the first budget I'm showing here is a single family home. And so the one that was $350,000, down payment at 20%, I put in 3 months reserve account in the budget, put in the rent I said of $1,600, factored in the mortgage, the insurance, taxes, the property tax, R&M, vacancy, and property management. And I put vacancy right now is around 2% in Edmonton, so that's probably a logical thing. R&M, people might look at this and go, 3% is way too low. Well, make it higher in your case. I was using a brand new property, so I put it low because I'd be saving this money over a lot of time, and I had a warranty on it. So again, use whatever your numbers are. But in this example, this is not a good investment because it is negative cash flow. It's negative $231 a month. And so automatically, this is not a good rental property because obviously things will get worse over time if something unexpected happens. So then I go to the townhouse example. It's cheaper. So I did have a friend propose this to me one time saying, I found this townhouse for $313,000. It's a great deal. It's so cheap. And then I did the budget for her to show her that this is a really bad idea because this particular townhouse had a condo fee of $250 a month. So what does that do to my cash flow? Well, obviously, if the rent was the same, which maybe it might even be a little less, but I was presuming it was the same, the monthly cash outflow is even worse in that situation. So both of these examples would not be good for investment. So then I just put the house with the suite, which is way more expensive, has a higher down payment. There's a reason people buy houses with suites or buy houses and put suites into them, because obviously we can get the the rent on the main floor, we can also get additional rent for the basement suite. In this example, I used $1,000. Again, this is just one example that I actually have a property just like this with these kind of rents. So I could say that this is an actual real example. And in this example, it's the first budget I showed that has positive cash flow. It's not huge. It's only $56 a month. But the other profit that we get obviously is our mortgage pay down, which I'll show on the next slide. And in my experience, when I built my first property in 2006, all I cared about was this number being zero. Because as long as it broke even, I had mortgage pay down and hopefully appreciation that I just didn't put in the spreadsheet. So I would make money over time. And remember, I have the property management in here as well, and I'm self-managing. So at the least, I'm also making this $260 in addition to this cash flow, right? But as you expand, that could change. So if anyone has questions about the budgets, you can ask questions now, but I'll just give one last slide here of the comparison just to show the single family house monthly cash flow 231, townhouse negative 321, the house with the basement suite 56. And I did put the return on investment, and this is a simple calculation where I just took the annual return, which would include your cash flow and mortgage pay down, which is the principal. I have, of course, I already mentioned I excluded appreciation, so these numbers would be better if you had appreciation. So you could see the return on the single family house 3.8, townhouse 1.8 because of the condo fees, but the house with the basement suite, this is actually not a bad return, 8.1%. Again, that's not factoring in appreciation. So despite it being low cash flow, that mortgage pay down does help a lot. So does anyone have any questions before I move on to pass the budget? No? Okay.
Oh, I have a question for you, Linda.
Sure.
So from your previous presentation, you had reserve account.
Yep. The reserve here. Yep.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is that for and why do you want to put it there?
Yeah. So what I always do in my budget is I take whatever my rent is and I multiply it by 3 and I make sure that I put this in the bank. Because if I don't have that and then I have a vacancy or I have a tenant paying rent late, I want this to be in my bank account at all times. Let's pretend I just have this one property. If I had $7,800 in the bank, my furnace goes, tenant pays late, vacancy, need to paint the property, something like that, which I might get back from some other source, but regardless, it's just the amount I'm keeping in the bank for the reserve for the property.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, one of the property I do with the properties I do JV with my partners, we do create the reserve funds over the period rather than put up front. But I think at the end we are doing so it's the same purposes.
Yeah,
to
and
cover unexpected expenses.
Yeah, and that's the good question. That's a good point too. So with joint venture partners, what I've done in the past is if I had, right now I own all my properties by myself. I don't have any partners, but at one point I did have some partners in some properties and some in other properties. So if this property was my own property, I'd have this in a separate bank account for myself. I'd have the $7,800 in that bank. And let's say, Amy, you and I buy one property together, then we would, the way that I always do it is I open a joint bank account for you and I together where we both can see it, and the reserve for that property is in that bank account. It's used to pay all the expenses and we can both see it. Right. So everyone does it differently, but I feel like that's the best way, especially because you're going to be doing taxes as joint venture partners together. So it is good to have that all in one bank account. You definitely don't want to mix your personal stuff with your joint ventures. And then if I had a different joint venture with somebody else, I would have a separate, and I've had that where I had other bank accounts with other people as well.
Right. Yeah. Sounds good to me. Thank you.
No problem.
And the one thing you can do for your reserve account is if you got the right mortgage set up and money goes back into your HELOC, you can have that HELOC available for rainy day funds without having to put cash up front.
Yes, and I do that too, Sean. So that's a great point. That's more of an advanced strategy, but for sure HELOCs. So Sean commented on a HELOC. So all of my mortgages I get on every property I buy now, other than new construction, when I first get it, you can't do this, but I refinance it this way, is I get a ready line product or a whatever it's called at the different banks. And Sean, I know you probably have access to some of the banks that have these different products where the HELOC, basically what happens is maybe upfront you have the mortgage at 80%, you don't have any HELOC yet, but as you pay down the principal on the mortgage, you get more money available on the HELOC. So for those ones, when I've got them, if I didn't have a reserve, I would set it up in the bank initially. But as soon as I do mortgage pay down every month, my HELOC becomes available, and that would become my reserve account then at that point. And I don't know if that's the kind of HELOC you were talking about, Sean, but you could also just get a separate HELOC too, right?
That's the kind I'm talking about, a readvanceable.
The readvanceable mortgages, yes. The ready line is one example, and I forget which bank that is, because I have those mortgages with, I have one with Service Credit Union like that. I also have some BMO mortgages like that, and I have RBC mortgages like that. And they're all called different things. But basically, what I've found with the banks is they don't ever tell you about them. I don't know if that's your, I mean, you're a broker, Sean, so I'm sure you would tell your clients. But when I asked my person at BMO, I said, why did you never tell me about this? Because this is years and years ago. And she goes, well, nobody, we don't like people re-borrowing money, because a lot of times they re-borrow to buy a personal car or something personal. Well, I mean, it's different when you're dealing with investors. We all know that if I want to replace the furnace, why don't I use my HELOC on the property to replace the furnace? Things like that. I might as well borrow the money to do that, right?
Well, you're dealing with some bank people who don't have a lot of experience, and maybe they were a teller last week and now they're in mortgages. So.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously using a broker is going to be the best way to make sure you can get the right lender and the right product for your needs, for sure. So, okay, so now due diligence. Make sure you research the neighbor carefully before buying. Now, a lot of people don't know about the City of Edmonton website. It is actually fantastic, and if you haven't used it, I would recommend doing it. So for any neighborhood in the city, you can look up demographics, you can look up income levels, you can look at age of people living there, all that. Now, it's not updated all the time, but certainly it's very good. The other thing you can look at on the City of Edmonton is actually the property tax assessed values of every single property. You can actually show it on a map that'll say your property is assessed at this, next door is this, next door is that. So before you're buying, you can see the tax assessed value of every single property in the City of Edmonton. You can also look at Edmonton Police crime stats. I do this a lot if I'm investing in a new neighborhood. So for example, maybe you decide, someone tells you you should invest in Mill Woods or in Northeast Edmonton, and you're used to investing in West Edmonton or Southwest Edmonton, and you go, well, I don't really know this area, what it's like. What you can do there is go into the Edmonton Police crime stats. And when I started doing this, every neighborhood you look at has crime. So you might go, oh my God, I'm not investing anywhere. It's terrible. But what I do is I actually look at this at the City of Edmonton. And if I live in, let's say I live in West Edmonton and Rosenthal, I'll check the crime stats there. And then maybe I would look at some neighborhood that I'm also comfortable investing in. Maybe it's in Meadowlark in West Edmonton. And then I might compare it to somewhere like Alberta Avenue, and then you'll see the difference in crime rates between different areas. So again, looking at crime rates as a standalone doesn't help you, but if you can compare to a neighborhood you're comfortable investing in to a different neighborhood you don't know about, you can kind of see the difference in crime. And is it, what kind of crime is it? Are there violent crimes, which are really bad? Is it break-ins where you can just have security systems? What kind of things are there? The other thing is research rents. So this is critical. So you can use Kijiji and other websites to see what current properties rent for in the same area. What I did when I was buying new properties, luckily I was looking at 3 different areas with one builder at one point, which was West Edmonton, Leduc, and Northeast Edmonton. And there was a brand new apartment building in all 3 of those areas from the same property manager. They had built brand new apartment buildings. So it was very easy to pick, say, a 2-bedroom unit or a 1-bedroom unit in each of the communities and go, okay, this in West Edmonton, for example, the rent was $1,200 a month because it's a really nice area, right by Lewis Estates, so $1,200. Then I would look in Northeast Edmonton, and I can't remember the numbers at the time, but it might have been $1,050, and maybe Leduc was $1,100. So not that I was using those rents in my budget, but I could at least see, hey, if I'm buying in Leduc, this might be what the rents would be if I'm in this neighborhood in Northeast Edmonton or whatever. So use that as, you can use those kind of apartment buildings as guides, because if they have them in lots of different areas you're considering, that can help you. Now, of course, the best growth is also near new infrastructure projects. So one thing that a lot of realtors will tell you is that if you're having a new LRT station near your rental house, it should increase the value by about 10 to 15%. So that is why a lot of people are investing in Mill Woods, or have been for the last few years. Same thing with West Edmonton, where the LRT is going. So that is something to consider. And always, if they just announce something and it hasn't started, don't factor that into your analysis, because money is always an issue. And if they haven't started something, it may never start. So just factor that in and make sure you know that something is going ahead before you assume that it will happen. So obviously, for due diligence, making sure you get good tenants, screen the tenants, make sure you always do a rental application. And I always make sure I also get income verification. So if they're self-employed, I usually get 3 months of rental income or bank account, sorry, my rental income. To make sure I can get my rental income, I get 3 months of bank statements from them showing how much money they were getting from their business. Otherwise, if it's employment, it's easy, just get some pay stubs, that kind of thing. I have been using an app called Neighborly more recently, because it does a credit check for the tenants, and it also uses artificial intelligence to prepare a rental report for you, telling you how successful the tenant may be. So they analyze a whole bunch of things. Now, it is quite onerous on the tenant. They have to upload their driver's license, a whole bunch of stuff. But obviously, by doing that, you have a lot of backup if you ever have a problem, to be able to deal with it, because you have all that history from that particular tenant. When you have an issue, make sure you deal with it right away. So if rent is late, you can do an eviction notice the first day it's late. So I never used to do this, but I started doing it because I might have someone paying late, and then they say, oh, you know, sorry, I never pay late, but my payday's on Friday. Can you just wait 3 days? And you might say yes, but then what if they don't pay in 3 days? Or what if they say, hey, is it okay if I pay, you know, on the 14th of the month? And you say yes, but what if they don't pay? Then you have to give them notice to move out at that date. So what I always have told my tenants is, I'm giving you an eviction notice today, but the way the Alberta rules work is if they end up paying the rent within that time frame, it's still, they still get to stay in the property anyway, right? So if you just give them the notice, you just let them know, hey, I'm not trying to evict you. It's just because I have to give you the notice now. I know you're going to pay me Friday. It's totally fine, but that way you can get them out on the 14th. Because if you wait till Friday, you still have to give 14 clear days notice, and it takes you longer to get the tenant out of the property as they're paying late. And then if you do have problems, consider the Residential Tenant Dispute Board. So it's only $75 to go there. I've been there many, many times. Basically, you fill out an application, you pay your $75, and there's never been a case where I've been there that I have not at least got something out of it. So they don't cover, what I've found is they don't cover late fees, even though I had them in my lease, but they will make the tenant pay the last rent that they owed. I've got tenants out of properties this way, so it is very useful. And there is still a lot of challenges, especially now with COVID, doing the hearings, and you have to actually serve papers to people. But I mean, it's way better than having to go to court and hire a lawyer. So this is a good service that we have in Edmonton. So obviously suites, they're allowed everywhere in Edmonton, but ensure you check rules of where you're buying if not in Edmonton. So a lot of people assume that the rules, if you're in Edmonton, that they're the same in Leduc or in Spruce Grove or Stony Plain or Sherwood Park or St. Albert, and that's not the case. So make sure that you know where you're buying, what's allowed. Same thing for short-term rentals. I mean, I can do Airbnbs in Edmonton, but certainly there's always different rules everywhere you are. So you have to check them very carefully. When I've been buying property, especially with new builders, I've been saying subject to city approval of this suite, because if the builder didn't include something in the suite that was required, then obviously I could make sure that the builder rectified that. And obviously you need to ensure all rules are known, because if you miss one item that's expensive to change, you could have an illegal suite and that can be shut down if a complaint's made. So some things you need for suites, you need fireproofing between the suites, you need 2 furnaces, you need large egress windows, separate entrances. In the past, you needed extra parking stalls. Parking has been reduced in Edmonton, where you only need one for the house and one for the suite, so makes it a lot easier. But still, I find you want to do as much parking as possible because people like to have parking, certainly. And the rules do change all the time, so it's hard to keep up. So as an example, in 2018, suites were allowed in duplexes in Edmonton. And also in 2018, garden suites were no longer discretionary use, which they used to be. And now they're allowed throughout the city, which is why I have lots of those. And in Rosenthal, we have tons of them. And then in 2019, tiny homes as garden suites and single family homes are also allowed, although there's restrictions on those. And that's why I now have a tiny home in Edmonton. I kind of like to look at these rules, and as soon as something's allowed, I like to do it just because it's kind of new stuff in innovative housing, and so works really well. So points to remember: always do a budget. Decide whether you want a property manager and research options and prices. And I say to do this before you even buy a property. So you may find a property, say a single family home in Calder, and think, well, this is great. I don't like the area. It's kind of sketchy. I don't ever want to go there, but I'll just get someone else to manage it. But then you call a bunch of property managers and say, forget it. I don't want to work in that area at all. And suddenly you have a property where you can't even hire a property manager for it. So before you buy a property or you're looking at a certain area, make sure you talk to different property managers you may want to use and make sure they will work in that area, because some won't even do single family homes at all. So obviously I made the note before, make sure you research the property and the area. So I put the link here to the City of Edmonton SLIM system, which I mentioned already. It shows assessed values. It also shows all the lot sizes. So if you're looking to see how big the lot is, if you're trying to figure out the zoning to see if it's, you know, is it RF1, RF2, RF3, RPL, RSL, makes a big difference, because with zoning in Edmonton currently, if you're in RF1, RF2, or RF3, you're allowed to have a main floor house, a basement suite, and a garden suite on one lot. If you're in RPL or RSL, you can only have a house with a basement suite or a house with a garden suite, not all three. That will probably change in the future, but zoning is quite important to just make sure that you're doing what you're allowed in the specific area. It also will show you the schools around and transit. So obviously, if you're buying a house for families and you think they need to take the school bus, you want to make sure there's transit there. So this website gives you all of that information. Obviously, you need to make sure you have a good team as well. So a good builder or a good realtor or both, and a lawyer and an accountant. And then, of course, research potential tenants, confirm the income, check references, and be skeptical. So I used to be an auditor, so I'm always skeptical, but don't believe anything anyone tells you when they're either trying to sell you something or trying to rent from you. I had one example where I was doing viewings for one of my friends that lives in Calgary that owns in Rosenthal, and the people looked perfect. They were well dressed. They had a beautiful vehicle, looked really clean. They knew that, like they talked really well. They seemed really professional. He did his credit check and everything, and there was a whole bunch of red flags, didn't end up renting to them. And then I ended up with a call a year later because someone had saw my name on the rental application I had given to those people. And it turns out someone else had rented to them, and they left in the middle of the night with a huge mess. So these were professional tenants that knew how to sort of play the system. So had Ian not checked all of everything else, he could have had huge problems. So make sure you do check research. Don't presume that someone's good just because they look good or they talk well or that kind of thing. So I did put the link for different sessions. So this one you're already in, so you know this one. Mogul Mastermind is another workshop that you can go to that's once a month, and RAIN is another resource you can use as well. And then if you do need any tenancy forms, you can get them from the Edmonton Landlord and Tenant Advisory Board. And they do answer questions from both landlords and tenants as well. And I have called them lots of times if a tenant is saying, hey, this is not right. I usually know the answer because I've researched it, but then I'll call them and then I'll give the tenant the phone number and tell them to call as well. And usually that avoids problems if they know that obviously I've checked, they know what the issues are. And then there is Service of Alberta has tenant information, and it's a whole document. And often I send excerpts from this to tenants. If they're questioning something I'm doing, I will send them information right from the Government of Alberta website so they know this is the rule, because a lot of times they really think things that are not true. And then I did put the link for the residential tenant dispute resolution service if you want to use that as well. Hopefully you don't have to, but if you do, obviously, then you have to. So I just put some pictures here of, this is one of my basement suited houses that I have, showing how it looks. And this is an Airbnb property that's been very successful. And then these are some of my garden suites, just to show what those look like for those of you who have not seen them. I know lots of people in the meeting have those kind of products as well. And then I just put my contact information here, my website, and my website does have a lot of resources as well. I do lots of videos, lots of them are about moving to Belize and shipping to Belize and investing in Belize. But anyway, I do that because I get questions all the time, and because realtors aren't licensed and there's no rules here, I get lots of people reaching out to me because of that. But certainly I also have a lot of links on things like how to travel for free, because I use, because I have Airbnb properties. I actually am staying in Toronto 2 weeks for free next year, staying in Austin for free, and Houston for free, and all of that's on my website too. So just a little bonus, if you do have property that's vacant or short-term rentals, you may, or even your own house that you leave and you want to get free accommodation in other places, definitely check out my website for that. So now I'll just open it up to questions.
I have a question. What have you noticed in the past as a decent percentage for expenses when you do your budgeting?
I don't ever look at a percentage for all my expenses. I do my Excel spreadsheet for every single property. So I'm happy to share it. If anyone wants to email me for my budget template, I'm happy to share it with you. And Jack has his hand up next. Go ahead, Jack, you're on mute. And now he's off the screen, so maybe he doesn't have a question after all.
I have one question.
Oh, he's back. Someone's talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I'm just want to ask about the insurance you put in your spreadsheet.
Insurance,
So,
yes.
yeah, like it's not that the tenant gonna pay for insurance. Is it the same or different insurance?
Different insurance. So what you need to have is you need to have insurance for your property, and you should in your lease also say the tenant needs tenant insurance. That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So your insurance will cover you if you have a fire, and make sure you tell your insurance company that it's a rental property. Your own home, you do need fire insurance, and the bank will usually need you to have it anyway. But when you have rental insurance, the good thing about that is if your house burnt down and you have rental insurance, you will also get money for the lost revenue on the property. So that's something special for rental. So you'll be paying that insurance, and then your obviously your tenant will get insurance for their own contents. And so there's lots of good insurance companies. I use TD Meloche Monex because I get a discount with, you know, lots of my graduation stuff from different schools. So lots of, if anyone has other companies they like, definitely put them in the chat as well. And then for Airbnb, it's an extra challenge that I'll talk about. TD Meloche Monex, they actually said before they wouldn't do Airbnb, and now they told me they do it as long as you only do it for half the year. So that was a new thing just this year. And so for my Airbnbs, I'm typically using Sonnet, which is online insurance.
And can you give it like a ballpark? What's the average for that tenant? Sorry, the owner insurance per year?
My insurance is typically around $1,000 a year for some of the properties.
Like if it's a bungalow upstairs and downstairs, or no, per unit?
I think those are, so my single family one was around 1,000, and I think my bigger ones, it all depends on the value of the house. So the more expensive it is, the higher it is. And I think my more expensive ones are maybe around 1,300 to 1,400 a month. Although I do shop around a lot, so I do get pretty good rates. So you could find a lot more expensive ones, certainly.
Thanks for answering.
Amy, do you have another question?
Yeah, I do have a rather than question, probably some answers and some additions to add to your presentation. So insurance wise, so I do have a properties, the single family houses with the basement suite, and then I do have a properties with the 8 unit in 4 townhomes. So when it comes to 4 townhomes, I think it depends on whether you have a tenants occupied or not. Also, it determines your insurance. So obviously the units are empty, not vacant, not occupied yet. The tenant, the insurance is going to go up a little bit. But if you consider all the units are rented out, then from my experience, I do have a property, single family house with the basement suite. I usually pay around between 100 to 230 per month. So I noticed that last year, the insurance this year, last year, the insurance went up quite a bit. So that's how much I'm paying for my single family house. And also those 4 townhomes with 4 basement suite, we are paying around $50 per unit kind of thing. So we are paying $400 per month for those.
So $50 per unit is what you're saying.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and with Sonnet, I was originally paying like 50 for the house and maybe 60 for the house, 50 for the garden suite, but they have went up a lot. Like you said, they went up a little bit, Amy, as well.
Right,
and it is
right.
good. The vacant insurance is a good thing to note. If your house is vacant, they will charge you more because there's more risk with it.
Exactly, and there will be only few insurance company would like to cover those kind of liability. So you have to look for some certain insurance they wouldn't mind cover for the vacant unit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then
yes, and
So
I would
go
like to add 2 more things to your presentation. There are lots of good, great information. Thank you so much, Linda, for preparing this great presentation. I just wanted to share a couple things that I learned throughout my journey. So one thing is that there's another website. So when you do a due diligence, there's a website called Honest to Door. So before I knew this website, in order to collect all the information, for example, okay, so what is the zoning? How big is this house? What is the lot size? What year it has been built? And then I wanted to see the picture of this property and what year this the last owner has been sold and how much it was sold for. So the Honest Door, if you go in, there are lots of the tabs, and actually it covers most of everything that I mentioned here, and it also shows the property tax per years too, and also it shows the graph of the property tax for many years, and also the what else? Oh yes, and then estimated the value for the property for years as well. So it comes at very handy. Before I knew this property, I used to go Slim, the city website, and then Google Map to see the house. And also I went to listing to find all the information if it was on the MLS. And also sometimes I use this site. I get to negotiate and deal with the seller direct. And I would like to know when this seller bought it last time and how much bought it, so that I know there's some room how much I can negotiate with the seller.
Which
so
Amy, can you put the name of that site for people into the chat just so people know? And a lot of that information you can get from your realtor too. So I don't know if there's a realtor on the call, but definitely a lot of that realtors will provide to you too. But if you're not using one yet, my friend Jay was just with me in Belize for three weeks. So he honest.com. Okay.
Yeah, the Honest to Door.
Perfect.
honesttodoor.com.
Wonderful. And I think okay, and then there is a couple of questions in the thing. Let's see. Curious about tiny home investment. Is this an investment you would suggest? So the reason I did a tiny home specifically was because obviously it's cheaper if it's smaller, and it's not cheaper to build one separately, but because I was building a brand new house to live in, it was easy to put a tiny home in the backyard and still have a really nice backyard versus putting a bigger suite. And because there aren't many tiny homes, it does really well on Airbnb. Right now I have back-to-back bookings solid for December, which is better than my 2-bedroom garden suites, and the rates are the same for the tiny home. So that's just an interesting note. And it's really in the suburbs, like really far, not even as good of a neighborhood. And it does rent really well. And I think it's because it's a tiny home. So that's the reason I did that. And it definitely, it was about $110,000 for the tiny home, brand new built. It has, well, you can look it up. It's on my website. You can look up pictures of it there. Whereas the garden suites are obviously a bit more, at least probably about $150,000. Let's see if there's other questions. Traveling for free, someone asked, how do you do that? So there's two ways. One is called home exchange, where you exchange your home or your Airbnb, in my case, for someone else's home. And there's insurance, just like Airbnb, $1 million, there's reviews, everything like that. And then if you like pets, the way I stayed in Seattle for free in August. I could walk to Lake Washington, and I was just dog sitting. So they don't have to pay for a dog sitter, and I don't have to pay for accommodation. So, and I have both of the links on my website, because if you sign up through a referral link, you'll get obviously a discount, and then I'll get some months free. So if you're interested in those, definitely go through the referral links. And it's an interesting way if you have vacant property to kind of use it, but they obviously have to be furnished in that case, which is why my Airbnb properties work really well. And I actually have a person coming through home exchange to one of my Belize tiny homes on the 13th of December. So that was a good way to get a lot of travel points. And that's how I'm staying in Austin next year, is through that company. Any other questions? Hearing none. Except Jack still has his hand up. Jack, do you actually have a question? Okay.
Yeah, so I need to know how you buying at a discounted price. Single family and suited properties, how you buy at a discounted price. If you can guide a little bit about that.
How I bought it, you mean initially, or how I buy it? Yeah, initially what I did is when I first started investing, I had one house that I lived in. We had lived in it for quite a while. So we had bought it for about 150,000. The mortgage was only at 60,000. So I had extra equity, and I called the bank and I got a HELOC, which Sean was just talking about HELOCs. And I actually used the HELOC to get the money for the down payment on my first brand new house. So that was the way I bought my first house. I didn't use any of my own cash at all. I used that HELOC. And then over time, I paid that HELOC off. And then I just kept using HELOCs for each other down payment. Usually I never have enough, because if I buy a house with a garden suite, my HELOCs are never enough. So I'll put in some cash, some HELOC, then pay the HELOC off, and just keep doing it again and again. And then I sell a property and then, pay it off and then get another one.
So you buy at a below market price?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily get a it's hard to say you get a discount on property. I mean, like what Amy said, she does, she goes direct to the buyer. I mean, for me, I deal with builders. Almost every property I've ever bought is brand new. There are a few exceptions, and the ones that weren't were kind of my worst properties, but my brand new properties, I mean, I used the same builder. So certainly I got a discount, because I mean, one builder I used, I built 4 or 5 different houses with them, and the other one a few as well. So obviously you can get deals that way. And my last house I built, because the economy was bad, I just told the builder, this is what I'm approved for. And they're like, well, it's 700 grand. I'm like, well, sorry, I only can pay 560. So they built it for that. So, and the tax assessed value is 613 already. So, I mean, that one I did really well on. That's the house with the tiny home. So you can do really well if you negotiate, but you have to kind of find the right place, I guess, to do it. And there are times where, like right now, I doubt you can do much negotiating on anything, especially new builds, because of the supply, the inflation, all that stuff. It's really, really hard to get materials, and everything is really, really expensive right now.
Okay, that's good. So you negotiate when you are building a house with like a basement suite, or maybe probably a garden suite also, or when you're negotiating with the builder, you are negotiating to build a basement suite too at the same time.
Well, yeah, if you're doing it at the same time, it does usually save you money, because if you're building a new house with a basement suite or a garden suite, the builder's already there. Garden suites, you need to trench utilities if it's an existing house. So when you're building brand new, typically it's a lot cheaper than if you're adding one to an existing property because of the trenching. So it's not like a discount, it's just the fact that it is cheaper. But I'm sure other people in the room who, I mean, I would definitely talk to the investor-focused realtors who, sometimes they'll have deals that go out before they're on MLS, and that's probably a way you can get a little bit of a better deal as well. And also we're going to have steals and deals coming up, and if somebody doesn't list the property on MLS and sells it direct to you, you could save a lot of real estate commission, and hopefully you can share that savings with the seller of the property, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
No problem. I see 2 more hands up. Tessa.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
No problem.
My question is on the down payment. Does it have to be 20% every single time, or Can you make it 5 or 15%?
Well, I'll answer with my thing, and then I'll make sure Sean doesn't have any things I don't know about because he's the mortgage guy. But typically for rentals, you always need 20% down. One way around it that I know that I have done myself is I lived in a house that I had paid 5% down on, and later I moved out of that house and made that house a rental. So in that case, definitely I paid 5% down because I lived in it. That's a change in use, quite complicated from an accounting perspective, but that is a way to pay 5% down. You can't keep doing that all the time. And Sean, do you have any other, and then using the HELOCs the other way, where I can't tell the bank I'm using a HELOC for the down payment typically, but usually what I've often done is I show my RSP statement and say, here's where my money can come from. But then when I actually make the down payment, I do use my HELOC instead. So then that obviously is making me pay way less down.
Okay, so a couple of things. Rental properties need 20% down. Some lenders don't do 20, they want 25% down, so it depends who they are. Location makes a difference. Sometimes if it's a small town or something, they may want more down. Or if there's some lenders, if you use market rents. Somebody's not muted there. Jack Smith's not muted. Let's see. There we go. Small town and using market rents instead of actual rents, you could go as low as 65%. So HELOCs are considered your own fund by pretty well every lender. So you can use HELOC and just tell them you're using it. So you don't have to play any games like that. So just make sure your broker knows where all your money is coming from. And the 5% down rule does work. The house hacking, basically, where you live in a property for a while and decide you want to buy a bigger, better house, so you convert that to a rental. But like you said, insurers don't like to see you doing that every year because they know what your game plan is, and you run out of insurers once you hit 3. So it's you got to show it's got to be legitimate. If you're going to put 5% down, you have to move into the property. So if you don't, it's mortgage fraud. So
yeah, and there have been people that tried to do it again and again. And also from a tax perspective, it can be a problem too, because a lot of times what they do is they live in it, or they put a tenant in it for a short time and then they sell it and try to say it was their principal residence. So that also can be a problem. I have another question on the chat. So someone says that they go away for a few months in the winter. Do we know of any temporary property managers that just deal with issues when you're out of the country? And that's a good question. I did I had my friend Ian used a lady at one point that just charged an hourly rate. I don't think that person's doing it anymore, but if anyone else has, I don't have anyone personally that I know that does it for just part of the year. But if anyone else knows anyone, certainly put it in the chat to help chat out. One thing I do though is I'm in Belize and I don't have a property manager in Edmonton. So I have 6 properties, including Airbnb. So people are like, how are you doing that? The thing is, I have a really great handyman, and he's the warranty guy for one of the builders. I also have another partner that helps me with just doing supplies. I have a great cleaning company that does everything and replenishes supplies. Plus I have a general contractor that is in Edmonton that also can help me with everything. So right now they're all setting up the painting and everything for the property the tenant just moved out. My handyman usually does my tenant walkthroughs because he needs extra money. So the thing you can sometimes do is just reach out to people. Like the warranty guy at my builder has 4 children. We knew he probably needed more money. So we just said, hey, do you have time to do work on the side? And he said, yep. And so he's built furniture for me. He's moved furniture, picked stuff up, does the tenant walkthroughs and all the repairs I need. He sets up all the trades for me. So that makes management a lot easier for sure. And then the only other thing is getting viewings for people, but generally speaking, I can find someone at home to just do viewings of properties. So that's pretty easy. So that's what I do, Chad. But if anyone else knows people that'll just do it, on a more hourly basis, then certainly share that as well. I don't see any other hands.
I can share a tip as to what I did with how I manage some of my properties when I'm away. One of the things that I did was one of my tenants was interested in real estate. And so I offered him sort of like free coaching if he would help me show empty units and deal with some other tenant issues. And so I gave him, like I taught him how to show units and how to deal with all of that, the walkthroughs and everything, so that he would be able to show the units for me. And then I would make sure that I was in communication with him during the viewings. And then in exchange for that, I would pay him, you know, some cash for doing that. And then I would give him free coaching to get him into real estate.
Perfect. Anyone else have any suggestions for that when you're away? Does anyone else have any creative ways to do things?
I do. Well, most of my properties, I'm putting a basement suite. So most of the days, my contractors are working there. So I sometimes ask my contractors that if I know they're going to be there from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., then somebody wanted to view it between those hours, then I ask them, my contractors, and most of the time my contractor doesn't mind to show the units for me. So that's another thing. And also like Hong Lu said, sometimes I talk to my the tenants, neighbor, and ask them if you want to show. And one of my tenants was like at her age, like 18, 17 years old. She was looking for some job anyway. So I offered that, okay, if you can show me the viewings, I can pay you like certain per hour kind of thing. So it worked out pretty good.
Yeah, and a lot of times I will have like, if I have a tenant where they're moving out early, then I will ask them if they want to get out early. Hey, can you make sure you show the property? Because if I find someone else, I'll let you leave early. Then they usually keep the property really clean, and that's a good thing anyway. Anyone else have any creative ways, or anyone else have any questions? Oh, Jack said you can contact him for contracting works and handyman, so that's good. Because that's one of the problems we have a lot if we're out of town when we're trying to manage, right? Okay, so no other questions. So I guess we're gonna get into steals and deals next. So I'm gonna try to see if I can share this instead. So we'll see. Trying to open up this other presentation here. Okay, so now I have the steals, deals, and services. So here, what we try to do is give people the opportunity to present just for 30 seconds. So don't give a really long-winded thing, either if you have a property for sale, a joint venture opportunity, or a service that's of interest to other real estate investors. So who wants to be first? Amy, I knew Amy would probably put up her hand at some point. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay, so I do have 4 single family houses with the basement suite. It's turnkey. We do have all rented out up and down, and a cash flowing, positive cash flow, like Linda said. And also when I manage those properties, we do have all expenses that Linda mentioned, including even the reserve funds as well. And after that, we still have a pretty good cash flow here. And this is the opportunity for a 50% equity partner. So I'm looking, so that's my part. So that's my the portion that I own. I'm looking to selling of my 50% equity ownership partner, the partnership. So let me know if you guys, oh yeah, and the good thing about this deal is that someone has a money, but they already maxed out with their mortgage.